So Outdoor Health Australia begins actually with other words. Bush Adventure Therapy. Back in 1997, we had the first International Adventure Therapy Conference held in Australia. It was in Perth. And before that and after that, some local, regional and national get-togethers had happened and were happening. And in 2002, we held our first South Pacific Wilderness Adventure Therapy Forum, we called it, to get together and share practices and explore what the unique and special elements of nature-based or bush adventure therapy, active experiential sessions in nature were like here in this land. And in 2008, we incorporated the Australian Association for Bush Adventure Therapy, but we've had national gatherings of this group, gathering around these words, since the early 2000s, so 2 decades. And we landed on these sorts of common ideas in relation to bush adventure therapy. They're nature-based health interventions, they're active social experiences in nature often, and they have specific therapeutic outcomes in mind. They tend to include bio or physical, psycho or mental emotional, social relational and ecological approaches within the interventions. So it's a very multidimensional way of working. And it's a very diverse field of practices in Australia, which we feel is a great benefit to people and the field in that there's more offerings for people to choose from. It's a rich set of practices. And there are bodies of supportive research evidence for these sorts of practices. And hasn't that research body grown exponentially over time? In the last couple of decades, there's been a proliferation of research, well-connected research, and also discrete research that builds new ideas and innovation in the field. But it's very clear there's a lot of evidence supportive of the biological or the physical benefits of experiential adventuring in nature, physical activity in nature, let's say, at its basic level. And I'll let you read the list of benefits there on the left-hand column. There's also a lot of evidence now on the therapeutic benefits of the relationships that happen in nature or outside. They have a different flavour than inside, in 4 walls, under a light, with 2 seats looking at each other, for another example of mental health care, counselling, therapy indoors. But the psychological benefits are different and the same in that outdoors in nature with time and space, the relationship between therapist or counsellor or health practitioner and clients or participants is equalised. We're both in the rain together. We're all around a circle together and we can all move and be in ways that are comfortable for us. We're not confined to 2 seats looking at each other. We can be whittling as we're chatting, that sort of thing. And so whittling wood, by that I mean with a little knife, shaping something out of wood. So the relationships are different. And when we add nature, there's now a huge body of evidence on all the range of physical, mental, emotional benefits of being in nature, simply being under a tree, outdoors, in the wind, in the sun. I'm looking over at a group of seagulls that seem to be nodding at me at the moment, hopefully not squawking too loudly. So I won't touch on that. I won't go into that evidence, but just to touch on it, to know these are some of the known benefits, the well-supported known benefits of being in nature on the right-hand column. So I mentioned that bush adventure therapy is a diverse field in Australia, and we've held forums over the last 2 decades in all states and territories of Australia. And we'll talk about the next one at the end of the session. It's also a well-connected field internationally. We gather around the terms international adventure therapy, and we've had conferences every 3 years for the last 2.5 decades, 25 years. And the last one in Norway, and the next one in Taiwan. And it's over 40 nations are now joining under that umbrella of international adventure therapy. Now, some of the formative and preliminary research in the field of bush adventure therapy has identified that it has potential to support benefits across biological, psychological, social, cultural and ecological dimensions of well-being. And it so happens that it makes sense, it's no surprise that all of these pathways are included in a common combination of physical adventures outdoors with others, that the biological pathways to benefits are involved in the therapeutic experience, as are the mental, emotional, the social, and often the cultural, not always, and often the nature, not always. So it becomes, therefore, a bio-psycho-socio-cultural, potentially, eco approach to human mental health care. So it meets the bodies of evidence in relation to trauma and trauma treatment, Van der Kolk, Berry, others, who would say that we need holistic, multidimensional experiences and successful experiences of moving through challenges or discomfort with support and with a successful, positive feeling and outcome involved. So there's a one slide overview of why and how these approaches work to support mental health. And in 2018, when Australia was hosting the 8th International Adventure Therapy Conference in Sydney, we started engaging with government at various levels, and we had a meeting where a kind federal policymaker in youth mental health said, you know, bush adventure therapy, I like the sound of it, but it's a bit confusing. I suggest you use different words or think about different words. And so we played around with words, and we felt that outdoor health really did represent the broad and diverse field of practice in Australia. And when we started to use those words, we then noticed, of course, and if we're using those words, well, equine therapy and nature prescribing and gardening and nature play, bush kinder and animal-assisted therapies, they all have a legitimate place under that kind of umbrella. And we smiled knowing that a lot of these modalities, practitioners from these various modalities, were already gathering in our community called bush adventure therapy. For a number of years, we've had practitioners of all of these kinds, not necessarily calling themselves an adventure therapy practitioner at all, but coming as a community gardener who works therapeutically with adults, or people working in hospital settings that bring animals in to support the mental health of patients. And so this bigger tent started to stretch and emerge in 2018, and we've voluntarily, it's a small group of people, unpaid, doing this on the side of their desks, have moved to transition the Australian Association for Bush Adventure Therapy to become Outdoor Health Australia. So we're just in the process now of moving to that different name. And under that different name, a whole plethora of evidence-informed, nature-based health practices have a place and a role. So another question for you to ponder as we move through this session: can I imagine bringing nature into my practice, adding a pot plant to my clinical space, for example? Or can I imagine taking my practice outdoors? Can I do what I do outdoors, outside, under the sun, in the weather? Maybe you already do. Maybe you'd like to share something of that in the chat space with everyone.
Thanks, Anita. So that last note about that transition between moving from a field of bush adventure therapy to the bigger tent of Outdoor Health Australia is one that is unfolding in here right at the moment, and we've actually got our last AGM coming up as the Australian Association for Bush Adventure Therapy before that transition occurs. So it's a pretty exciting time for these sort of practices in this country, and increasingly we're finding allied health professionals, counsellors, people from helping professions looking in and going, what I'm doing in indoor practice is great, but it's not meeting the need for everyone that's wanting to come through the door and come in to get services and access services from me, and this might be another avenue as well. And so we're seeing a really strong interest from helping professions looking into this field now. So as Pedro mentioned earlier, we will share links to these different organisations as we go through. I've got some QR codes coming up. If you've got your cameras on your phones ready, you can grab them from that, or we'll also share the links as URLs as well. So that's all coming up. So Anita mentioned that shift started a number of years back when we were thinking about language that would have us situate these practices more effectively within the health sector. And so when we think about outdoor health, it's a more emerging form of healthcare. It operates across spectrums of need, as Anita mentioned, for individuals, families, groups and communities throughout the lifespan, and emphasising that we're adding that ecological benefits of using our bodies in place, and how there's even some research coming out that sees people who come into contact with nature are seeing the ecology of life around them in that microcosm, and they're thinking about the ecology of their own life is increasing as a result of that exposure, greater exposure to nature. So the ecological benefits are not just in the experiences themselves, but they can reflect back on how people organise the ecology of their own life. And it's a diverse field of practices in Australia and around the world, and it's richer for that. Well, our next step in this presentation was really to invite again to locate these practices within that health sector, and so I've got a couple of slides that help do this. This is a representation of what the Australian health system looks like, and so thinking about that in relation to hospital care, health promotion and disease prevention, primary health care and specialist care. We think about mental health services being within that specialist care area, and allied health services being in that primary health care domain. And these dots in the middle of this diagram are representing that the outdoor health sector, organisations and services and programs that are in existence at the moment are already operating across those different areas of the health system. And to illustrate that in a little more detail, these are just some examples from Victoria. And so, as Anita mentioned, hospital gardens fit into that. Rehabilitation programs that use active recreation, programs that working with kids that are chronically ill and have life-threatening conditions that don't get to access more adventurous play. There's options for supporting that and seeing the flow-on benefits that can bring. So programs operating across all of these different areas of the health system. And again, this slide here that Anita shared, that biopsychosocial eco approach to human health and healthcare. We know that often we make sense of the experiences of life through story and through thinking through those processes. But we know that the experiences of our life, the adverse experiences that we have, are kind of etched into our bodies in unconscious ways throughout our system and our body, and that to help shift those in lots of instances, we need to activate all of those systems in social contexts, in environmental contexts that are conducive of creating new ways of being as we move away from ill health in all its different forms. I think I'm passing back to Anita at this stage to look at a couple of other maps for how we situate this sort of practice within the health system.